Netanyahu is trying to navigate a very fine line between catering and consolidating his domestic support 79, 89 days before the most consequential election in Benjamin Netanyahu's political life on one hand, and trying to manage and keep Donald Trump in his corner on the other.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected Donald Trump's 15-point plan for Gaza, declaring he will not withdraw his military until Hamas is genuinely disarmed. Last month, President Trump's Board of Peace said it had reached an agreement for the complete disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza, with President Trump saying it was a monumental step towards lasting peace and security. But Hamas said handing over its heavy weapons was subject to Israel ending all forms of aggression and withdrawing its forces from Gaza. Speaking at a cabinet meeting earlier today, the Israeli Prime Minister said Israel rejects the 15-point document, adding that the Israeli military will not carry out any withdrawal until Hamas is genuinely disarmed and will continue to thwart threats against our forces and our citizens. Well, let's find out more from Anshel Pfeffer, who is Benjamin Netanyahu's biographer, also Israel writer for The Economist. Good afternoon to you, Anshel.
Good afternoon, Caroline.
Well, it was a very defiant message that we've had, the Israeli government putting out the full text of it. Why do you think he's taken this stance now?
Well, it's pretty obvious he's taking it for domestic reasons. He wants to keep his right-wing political camp together, and most of his political partners who on the far right are against this deal. They want Israel to remain in Gaza in perpetuity, basically, and Netanyahu can't afford on the eve of an election to cross them. Also, many of his voters, of his core constituency, that's their stance as well. But I'd also be careful not taking Netanyahu's statement here today too seriously. First of all, it took Netanyahu 9 days since Donald Trump made that announcement. We're talking last Thursday night, so now it's 9 days since then. Finally he's got around to responding. He didn't say anything about this for 9 days, so that's one thing to take into account. So he's being careful not to cross Donald Trump too much. And from what we're hearing on the ground from officers in the Israeli army in Gaza, that they've actually been given orders already 6 days ago, last Monday, to stop airstrikes and major operations there on the ground, and they've even withdrawn from a part of no man's land that they were holding towards what's called the Yellow Line. So there has been, from what we're hearing, this hasn't been confirmed, but we're hearing it from a number of sources, some type of a withdrawal, and there is some type of toning down or ratcheting down of Israeli operations there, despite what Netanyahu said today. So it looks like Netanyahu is trying to thread the needle here. On the one hand, for his domestic political audience, he's saying, we don't accept this 15-point plan, but not, but on the other hand, he doesn't want to anger Donald Trump. So actually on the ground, there are the first stages of confirming with this plan. And it has to also be pointed out, 10 months ago, Netanyahu signed the plan that basically this 15-point plan that was presented now is part of it. So as far as Netanyahu's own signature and his own policy is concerned, today's announcement seems like a gesture for the local crowd, and Donald Trump will still get what he wants.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because, I mean, he does repeat in this statement, we reject this 15-point plan. You talked about him not wanting to annoy President Trump too much. But, I mean, these two men are such incredibly important allies, of course, work together on the launch of the war against Iran. We are yet to hear from President Trump himself. But what do you think this is going to do to this key relationship between the two leaders?
Well, we've seen in recent weeks, even for the last couple of months now, quite a lot of tension between Netanyahu and Trump. as you mentioned, at the end of February, Trump and Netanyahu launched together the war against Iran. But then Donald Trump decided to end the war and to basically go for a ceasefire without consulting with Netanyahu. And we know that Netanyahu would have been happy to continue the war against Iran, but Trump has changed his mind. Trump is now carrying out negotiations with Iran through various intermediaries, and the Israeli government is not part of that process. And we've also heard some quite astonishing things said by Trump and other people in his administration about Netanyahu in the last few weeks. So things aren't as they were in that relationship. Now, it goes up and down. Things, they may become the closest of allies once again. But Netanyahu's main focus right now is that in 79 days there's an election here in Israel, and he's in trouble. The polls are showing that his coalition won't have a majority. Now, there's still, like I said, 79 days. He can still perhaps make that up. But he needs, first of all, to keep hold of his voters, of his base. And that's what we saw today in that announcement in cabinet. It was very much something that he said for his voters. He didn't put out a statement in English. He didn't, he's waited 9 days to say this. And there was a lot of pressure on him from the far right about over the agreement that Trump unveiled. So he now said, okay, well, we don't accept that. But like I said, on the ground, it does seem that Israel is making some early steps actually to confirm with the agreement.
And while Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to shore up that pressure from the right ahead of the elections, I mean, he's also insisting on this real disarmament from Hamas. And I mean, that was part of the original deal, wasn't it? Is there any sign at all that Hamas is actually prepared to do that, is prepared to start to hand over its weapons?
Well, we're seeing a similar dynamic happening from Hamas. I mean, since the announcement by Trump 9 days ago, they also put out statements saying, well, we're only going to disarm until when Israel withdraws. Now, from what we've seen in this the Trump announcement and the plan put out by the Board of Peace and clarifications made since by the Board of Peace Chairman Nikolai Mladenov, they've all said that Israel withdraws after Hamas disarms. So there certainly is an argument here over the sequencing, and those of your listeners who remember the Northern Ireland peace process will remember that was a similar issue there. How does each side, which side goes first, and how are the arms decommissioned, and when are they decommissioned, and so on, and who takes ownership of those arms, and where are they held, or are they destroyed, or are they put in storage or something? So these will be issues that are still being hashed out, and I think that it'll take probably weeks and months until we have a clearer idea of who has to go first and what are the stages here. And I think Netanyahu, like I said, is trying to thread the needle between angering Donald Trump, and from what we're hearing and seeing in Gaza, Israel has for 5 or 6 days now paused most of its offensive operations. So there is a change there, even if Netanyahu isn't acknowledging it in his announcement. And
okay,
like I said, doing his politics. But it's, even if Netanyahu and Hamas were both to say, yes, we accept this, I would still expect to see weeks and months of wrangling over who's going to go first and what the sequence is going to be of disarmament and withdrawal.
Anshel Pfeffer, Benjamin Netanyahu's biographer, Israeli writer for The Economist. Really good to get your insight. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's speak to Aaron David Miller, who's a former peace negotiator in the Democrat and Republican administrations. He's also a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Good afternoon to you, Aaron.
Hey, Caroline, great to be here with you.
Well, really good to have you with us. Tell us what you make of this pretty strongly worded statement from Benjamin Netanyahu saying that Israel does not accept that 15-point plan.
Look, I think Anshel Pfeffer's got it right. Netanyahu is trying to navigate a very fine line between catering and consolidating his domestic support 79, 89 days before the most consequential election in Benjamin Netanyahu's political life, on one hand. and trying to manage and keep Donald Trump in his corner on the other. I would note, though, that the statement doesn't suggest, it basically says that the U.S. and Israel are continuing to talk about this. There's also pretty good evidence that what Anshel suggests is a sort of scaling back of Israeli ops on the ground in Gaza taking place. I mean, I'm also told that any strikes, particularly against Hamas officials, are to be cleared with the chief of staff. Local commanders do not have specific or authorization to strike. So you've got all that going on. You also have a major concession from the administration a week ago, when representatives of the administration, including Nicholas Mladenov of the Board of Peace, met with Benjamin Netanyahu and all but acquiesced in his interpretation that withdrawal and disarmament will not go hand in hand. That in essence, disarmament will occur first, and then the Israelis will withdraw. We have not heard yet from Donald Trump. He does not like public no's from his partners who clearly are dependent on him. And in this case, as Trump himself has said, Netanyahu is a junior partner. So the real question, I'm waiting to hear what the president has to say. But again, it's a question of where the president is focused now. It seems to me, as long as the Israelis don't initiate a major operation in Gaza, as long as they continue to play along with the rather extraordinary but still incremental process between Israelis and Lebanese, and they don't do anything truly to humiliate or embarrass the president, that he's probably going to give Netanyahu some room and some margin to play along too.
It's fascinating you say that. As you say, we're waiting to have any response from President Trump. In the statement put out, or the words which Benjamin Netanyahu delivered to his cabinet, he says that we are talking to the Americans about the whole question of Hamas's disarmament. They have ideas, some of which are acceptable to us, some of which are unacceptable to us, and we know how to stand up to these things. He talks about the importance of the Israeli Defense Forces continuing to thwart threats against our forces and our citizens. So he appears to be trying to hold out an olive branch and talks about the importance of the partnership with the US. But at the same time, he does repeat pretty flatly, we do not accept this plan.
Look, all politics are local, right? So you got a guy who's governed Israel 15 out of the last 17 years. A guy's on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in a Jerusalem district court, now 5 years in running. If he's convicted, if he can't maintain himself in power or block someone else from getting into office, and there's precedent for that between 2018 and 2021, he could conceivably be convicted and serve time. One of his predecessors, Ehud Olmert, served 17 months for one of the charges that Netanyahu is accused of, or the famous or infamous plea deal, which would end his political career. To me, the acid test of this relationship in the next 79 days turns on one fundamental reality. Will Donald Trump, figuratively speaking, set up in Washington a let's reelect Benjamin Netanyahu campaign headquarters? Will he continue to praise the prime minister? Will he continue to argue that he's absolutely essential for the U.S.-Israeli relationship? Will he continue to push for a dismissal of the charges and a pardon for Netanyahu? That, to me, is critically important, as Trump did in Trump 1.0. Trump cannot reelect Benjamin Netanyahu, but he will amplify Netanyahu's vulnerabilities. Should he be neutral? Let alone should he basically argue that I'm the champion of the U.S.-Israel relationship and my partner Benjamin Netanyahu is not carrying his full weight.
Well, can I just ask you how important you think it is in this whole wider process? Because, of course, this latest 15-point plan was supposed to implement part of the wider plan that was agreed last year. Benjamin Netanyahu has also said very emphatically that he will never allow a Hamas-run state in Gaza. Is that a problem if we're ever going to get to any realistic settlement or peaceful resolution to what is happening in Gaza?
You know, the 15-point plan is intriguing, but Carole, let me be very clear, and I will, in fact, refer to your experience and Britain's experience in Northern Ireland. Good Friday was 1998. It took 7 years, 2005, for the PIRA and the paramilitaries, Protestant paramilitaries, to decommission, demilitarize. And a political accord was reached before the disarmament process began. It was done under competent and expert international auspices. And with respect to verification, there was no effort made to humiliate one side or the other. You don't have that here at all. You have a fundamental, and I would argue, irreconcilable clash between this Israeli government's vision of what Gaza should be and Hamas's vision. And that is why every ceasefire plan has cratered and not been able to move forward. I see almost no chance between now and October 27th that there'll be any significant or substantive process on breaking the catch-22 between withdrawal on one hand and disarmament on the other.
Aaron David Miller, former peace negotiator in the both Democrat and Republican administrations in the US, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caroline. Great to be with you.